Welcome to the Wealthsteading Podcast. This is episode 457. Today is November 24th, 2024. I'm your host, John Pugliano. I'm also the founder and money manager at investablewealth.com. Well, hey, we're almost 20 days past the election. I've been dragging my feet about putting out a new episode, but I think the time has come, and hopefully this will put all the questions to rest that I've been receiving from people asking, what changes have I made to my portfolio? Well, astute listeners of the podcast would know that I didn't make any changes to my portfolio post-election. Well, up until Friday anyways. And by the way, a little side note here. I'm late in getting my blog post notification out. I just put that out today. So if you haven't received the update, don't panic. It is going out today. If you don't receive it and you are signed up for the free blog post notifications, well, check your spam folder because chances are it might be there. But remember, you don't even have to be signed up. If you just look at the blog spot and alert notifications over at investablewealth.com, everything I put out is always archived there. There's no paywall. You don't need a secret decoder ring. None of that. It's all up on the website. Every blog post that I've ever written since 2013 is up at that site. They're all archived. And today's notice is no different. I won't get into that other than to say I did add to my Alphabet position. Remember, Alphabet owns Google. Google's been beat up lately. It's had a really bad 6 months or so. I own a small position in Alphabet. I own the GOOGL version of it. I still like it. I've used this dip to add to my small position with another small position. I'm not betting the farm on it, but I think a lot of the negative headlines are overstated. I bought in with the chart pattern for now holding at its 200-day moving average. If that support breaks down, then I'll reassess the chart patterns. But in my mind, Google is worth a long-term hold. And if you want to know more about that, check out the blog post of today. But that gets back to today's episode, which is effectively a continuation of the long-term trends that I've been talking about. And specifically to the election. The reason I haven't changed my portfolio since the election wasn't because I thought Donald Trump was going to win, and so I pre-positioned for it. I had no idea who was going to win. The polls were close enough, I think it could have gone either way. Frankly, I thought Harris had a better chance of winning. Not because I favor her, or even because I think the American people liked her more. I simply expected the Democrats to cheat better than they did. Which just goes to prove the point that the ruling elites are even more incompetent than we think they are. In any case, I constructed my portfolio the way I did, not because I wanted to take advantage of a red team or a blue team. I constructed it based on what I think are long-term trends. And Trump, whether you love him or hate him, it's just part of the trend. Now, I know some of you are saying, yeah, but Harris would have done a better job for the economy, or other people are saying Trump is going to do a better job for the economy. Well, here's what I think. Trends are trends, and while an administration can make an impact on the margins, overall, the trend is going to move in that direction simply because it's the trend. You can't fight gravity. You can't fight nature. It doesn't make sense to fight trends because ultimately that's what trends are. The economy is just one big biological organism, and it's governed by natural forces. I really think the biggest impact on the stock market from the Trump win is really the tax policy. I mean, there's effectively no way now that we're going to see the large tax increases that potentially we would have saw under Harris. I say potentially because, well, I do think a lot of the Trump tax cuts from his first presidency, would have gone away. The really crazy talk where they floated the idea of a wealth tax or taxing unrealized gains, I just didn't think that had a prayer chance of passing anyways. So as far as the overall economy, the reason I didn't really care whether it was Tweedledum or Tweedledee in terms of performance of the stock market, or I guess more appropriately, I should say the reason I didn't think Wall Street would care is because Wall Street likes divided government. And I know some people are saying, hey, it's a red sweep. Trump won the House and the Senate. And the bottom line on that is that you can see, as all the final numbers are being tallied, that Trump has had his overall popular vote eroded, so there isn't as much of a mandate there as many had first hoped. And while they do hold the House and the Senate, they hold them both with very slim margins, and in particular, almost no margin in the House. That's going to be complicated because if you look at, the many Trump appointments that are going to happen, a lot of those appointees are going to come from either the House or the Senate. That could cause special elections, and where the Democrats are going to try to get a majority back in the House. And certainly if they don't achieve that during the special elections, they're going to do everything they can over the next 2 years to try and gain control during the midterms. And that really comes back to the divided government thing. So what doesn't he control? He doesn't control the establishment. I'm talking the universities, the academics, the media, the C-suites of big corporations, the labor union leadership. All of those major non-governmental organizations and even the bureaucracies within the governments, whether they be federal, state, or local, in almost every case, they lean to the left. And both the red team and the blue team, I think, would agree to that. The only difference there is, why do they lean to the left? The Republicans would say that these organizations lean to the left because of corrupt bias. And the Democrats would acknowledge that these organizations lean to the left, but they'd say that that's because these people are obviously more intelligent and successful and they're too smart to, favor Trump. Hey, I'm not going to get into that argument one way or the other. I care less about the why and more about the way it is. And the way it is that even though Trump does, at this point, have slight majorities, he doesn't control the institutions. That's divided government. Trump may be more favorable in terms of some of his policies, in promoting some aspects of the stock market over others, but that's not a sure thing because, again, he does not control the established elite, and they're going to put roadblocks up in front of him. So while some of Trump's policies, like the tax cuts, may be more favorable than Harris's would have been, on the other hand, had Harris got elected, even though her policies perhaps might have been more detrimental to the economy, the media, the academics, the universities, all the establishment, they would have moved in lockstep with her and told everybody how great things were, just like we've seen over the last 4 years. In any case, okay, I'm done. And please, don't think I'm left or right, red or blue, Republican or Democrat. I don't like any of them. And I think people that go into politics are either psychopaths when they get there, or the system corrupts them if they stay long enough. Okay, so back to the long-term trends. Whether you love Trump or hate Trump, he, or more probably it, is the trend. It's that discontent that the electorate has with their governments that put Trump in office the first time in 2016, which I don't think was a coincidence that that's also the year that the UK had Brexit and voted to leave the European Union. In both cases, the Trump win and the Brexit, the governing elites were shocked. But this is just part of a long-term trend of populist discontent with their governments, whether it's in Brazil or Argentina or the US or Europe. Since 2016, look what's happened in the EU. The media talks about the movement to the far right. Well, really, their arguments are no different than the UK had with Brexit. Citizens, voters, they're fed up with stagnant economic growth. They're fed up with inflation. They're fed up with what they consider to be excess immigration. And just overall, they're blaming the governments for this, which it is the government's fault. And beyond that, I call it the failure of isms. Ism meaning capitalism, socialism, communism, and even all the identity isms, feminism, environmentalism. Listen, over the last 80 years, pretty much post-World War II, the world has seen economic expansion like it's never seen before. And all the isms take credit for it. If you live in the U.S., well, we look at the rising standard of living and the stock market and everything else, and the government says, hey, it's capitalism, vote for us. In China, they had a rapid standard of living increase over the last 80 years, and more importantly, over the last 40 years. What do they take credit for over there? Well, of course, it's communism. Europe is the same case. Europeans look at their economy, their stable jobs, their healthcare system, their early retirement and pension systems, and they say, hey, it's socialism. On the identity side of isms, it's the same way. If you're a woman and you've gotten ahead over the last 30 or 40 years, well, the feminists take credit for that. When you look at the environment and it's cleaner today than it was over the last 80 years, I know there's all kinds of talk about carbon this and climate change that, but hey, I grew up in Pittsburgh in the 60s and 70s, and I can tell you the environment is a whole lot cleaner today in the United States than it was in the 60s. Now, who's going to take credit for that? Why? It's the environmentalists. So it's all the isms. But you know what? I don't think the isms had anything to do with it. You know what it is? I think it's the human desire to improve their condition using technology. And you go back over the last 80 years. Following World War II, the reason that we've seen the major economic expansion that we have is because technologies had come about to improve the human condition, namely growing food and preventing contagious disease. Those two things alone took the world population from maybe either just a little above or a little below 2 billion people in the 1940s to today where we have over 8 billion people. Never in the history of humanity have we seen that type of population growth, and correspondingly, that's created economic growth. So when I look at GDP, all that economic expansion, it pretty much tracks with some lags and variabilities, but it tracks the population growth. And where do we find ourselves today? Population is stabilizing, and really in most of the world, it's in decline. You've heard me talk for years, literally probably a full decade, about the decline in fertility rates. It gets worse every year. And so consequently, those isms are breaking down. Capitalism doesn't work as good as it used to. Socialism, communism. They can't take credit for a growing economy which was based on population and demographics because population is stagnant to in decline. Consequently, the economy is too. So I think mostly that's the big trend that's seeing all these government disruptions and move to voter discontent and more populistic type tendencies. And you combine that with the fact that technology, which overall is always mankind's saving grace, that's how we elevate our standard of living. All the technological advances, which have been innumerable, all those that have occurred in the last 80 years, the governments and the ruling elites have degraded those technological benefits, which mostly account for deflation. People don't understand inflation and deflation. Yeah, a lot of it has to do with monetary policy, but the biggest impact comes from technology. Technology is responsible for reducing variable cost. That's how we become more productive. Because of technology, you need less labor input. You need less materials. It takes less time to make a product or a service. Again, this is something I've talked about for years. We need to probably have one or more episodes specifically dedicated to that. But think of technology and its impact on the economy in terms of reducing variable cost. You can think of that in terms of digitization. Things like a book. 40 years ago, if you published a book, before you could even print the paper, you had to make the paper. And once you did print it, then you had to bind it into a book and you had to physically distribute it. So that involved everything from growing trees and paper mills to printing factories and distributing things in local brick and mortar bookstores. Well, fast forward to today. What do we have? Things like Kindle books, PDFs. You don't have all that variable cost that you had when you were physically printing a book. That's what technology does. And governments, the isms around the world, have squandered the advancements in technology with unnecessary inefficiencies like excessive regulation and redistribution and the consequences of currency devaluations. And right now, we're seeing the chickens come home to roost. But in terms of the stock market and in terms of the overall economy, the decline in population is going to be less impactful here because although our fertility rate is collapsing like everywhere else in the world, the U.S. has the ability to do a brain drain and bring in the necessary labor and intelligence and skills that we haven't homegrown. That's a key factor that almost no other major economy can tap. I mean, how many people do you see that are sneaking across the Russian border or sneaking into Iran or legally or illegally trying to get into China? This is why I never get caught up in the fear and gloom and doom that people have about the BRICS nations. No matter how bad it is here, it's still better than everywhere else. The United States is the best house in a bad neighborhood. People want to come here. People can be successful here. And I think that trend will continue. We are the tallest midget. And that's why my portfolio hasn't changed since the election. I don't care if it was the red team or the blue team that would have won. I'm investing in what I think are the long-term trends, which are going to be centered in North America and specifically in the United States and among the countries that are true allies of the United States. And all the other issues that we're seeing, whether they be the Cold War or hot peace or the emergence of large language models and other types of artificial intelligence, I believe that we've come to a Sputnik-type moment where the industrial policies, the tariffs, the sanctions, the restrictions on technology, the legislation to reshore and manufacture more things in the United States, all those would have continued whether it was Trump or Harris, just like Biden not only continued the tariffs that Trump put in place, but he added more sanctions and more industrial policy and more restrictions on technology transfer. So these are long-term trends, and in my opinion, they all favor the convergence of technology and industrialization. So no, my portfolio hasn't changed. Hey, I can't predict the future. Incidentally, neither can you or anyone else. So come on back for future episodes of the Wealth Studying Podcast, and we'll see what happens. Until then, as always, this is John Pugliano wishing you the very best returns.